Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to another episode, the 73rd edition of the New Untouchables, coming to you this week, April 3rd, 2026, at approximately 5:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And usually I like to lead in with a perspective of the New York Times and responding, but there is so much unbelievable information out there that I think I'm just going to tee up what everybody's actually responding to and just let us roll with it because it seems to be that there's three major topics of conversation, always led by just the full exploration of corruption. That seems to endeavor every aspect of what we're involved with, whether it's the war in Iran, whether it's obviously the firing of Pam Bondi, and then all things Epstein as it continues to move forward. And what seems to be the, shall we say, sliding doors and people missing the full breadth of what we're in the midst of is some sort of response from either the Democratic Party or legal experts to help create a configuration of responding in a very technical way to the insanity of this corruption that we're in the midst of. So I hope I can lean on you guys today, as we do every week, to provide further analysis and insight as to what the real story is as these things completely collapse around us. And I think we'll start off the dialogue, if you don't mind, with June Carbone, the Rabina Chair of Law, Science, and Technology at the University of Minnesota. What are your thoughts as this week comes to an end?
Well, it's tempting to say this every week, but this week I am more convinced than ever it may mark a turning point on several respects. First, Trump's speech. Before the speech, 56% of Americans said he is not cognitively fit to be president. Over 60% saw him declining. Now, if you say, what did this speech do? Ordinarily, a presidential address is designed rally the nation, set the stage for a new era, whether it is declaring war or ending war, giving reasons that lock in the American public behind the president. Trump did none of those things. So the speech was incoherent and contradictory. It promised an end to the war and said we would bomb them into the Stone Age simultaneously. It was incoherent. Probably more importantly, I think when you want to say, how does the average citizen respond to a speech? My advice is turn off the volume. If you do that, Trump looks old, low energy, um, more meandering than he was before. Indeed, the contrast with a year ago when he declared Liberation Day and the tariffs has been noted in many podcasts. So I think the idea, I think, is sinking in for Americans the way it's sunk in for Europeans with his speech about Greenland, where he lusted for Greenland and kept calling it Iceland. That you had somebody who is dangerous, not entirely in touch with reality, and any country that would have him as president is neither to be respected nor regarded as a reliable ally. I think for the American public, that speech will be noted as a point where a lot of people are waking up to the fact that he is potentially dangerous. Now, Pam Bondi. I think Pam Bondi and Kristi Noem being fired will be a marked turning point. And there are at least two questions with Bondi. First, um, we now have some investigations. There have been multiple referrals to the Florida bar, and they said, we're not going to investigate her while in office. But there are all kinds of things you can investigate her for. She is going back to a lobbying firm with which she was associated before she became Attorney General, who's one of the major clients, Qatar, who is almost certainly paying her off and ensuring the soft landing for stepping down as Attorney General, Qatar. Um, that itself is, it could be a subject of investigation. But I think more critically, how many lies has she made to Congress? The one that I focus on in particular that gets very little attention is that she said, point blank, there is no evidence the Russians interfered in our election. That is flat out lie. The Mueller report developed extensive evidence that the Russians interfered in the 2016 election. And um, they indicted any number of Russians for doing so. What they didn't find was conclusive evidence that Trump was in conspiracy with Russia to interfere in the 2016 election. That's different. Russia did interfere, and there's substantial evidence of it, and she lied about it in a bold-faced manner. None of this, she equivocated about lots of things, refused to answer a lot of questions. That was an absolute declaration. And that gets us to Epstein. A lot of the scuttlebutt in blogs, media, is that, hey, what a great distraction. So the speech didn't go so well, the war in Iran isn't going well, and the focus is going to be back on Epstein, fire Pam Bondi. Now, she doesn't have to appear in the upcoming hearing on the Epstein files for which she's been subpoenaed. And besides that, a new attorney general has at least 6 months to say, me? What do I know? I'm getting on top of this. I will report back to you. So I think this certainly is serving as a distraction. But the question, as we return to the Epstein files, is what should we focus on? So certainly the victims aren't getting justice. But I think the idea that it's hard to prosecute individuals for sexual misconduct, it's always been hard. It is still hard. The major prosecutions go after trafficking rings, but Epstein is dead. How many other people are complicit? But the piece we know the least about is the foreign intelligence angle. So Acosta is reputed by mainstream journalists to have said the reason for the sweetheart deal was he's intelligence. The question we don't know, whose intelligence? So the new part that has surfaced is that the last person Epstein apparently spoke to, at least on the outside, was his then girlfriend, who turns out to be Russian. He pulled all kinds of strings to get her into Columbia Dental School. There's a whole story about that relationship. She was in Russia at the time he spoke to her, having bribed somebody to give him a phone, a mobile phone, while in jail. And he called her. And she's never been interviewed. That story, almost completely undeveloped. And so the question, is he allied with American intelligence, Israeli intelligence, Russia intelligence? The answer is almost certainly yes. And the question then is, who's pulling the strings and what did we not investigate? So the number of things that have not been investigated is huge. There's some movement on Zero Ranch, but I don't see any on counterintelligence. One more note about what is getting very little attention, but is absolutely outrageous. The Hill ran a piece, almost certainly leaked by Republicans, saying, oh, guess what we got from the Jack Smith proceedings? Jack Smith issued all of these subpoenas for the phone records of people like Kash Patel. How outrageous! We have proof of the weaponization of the Justice Department under Biden. Well, of course, the flip side of that is what did Jack Smith find out about who orchestrated Jan 6? Where's the money? Where are the contacts between the Trump White House and the people in the streets? I sure would like to know. And Jack Smith found some things because he did a much more in-depth investigation, and we know he made a deliberate decision only to indict Trump, given limited amount of time before the election, but he had a whole list of other people he could have indicted and was perhaps planning to indict. We don't have Jack Smith's full report. I'll end there.
And Mark Dan, the former state attorney general of Ohio and in private practice at Dan Law, who specializes in consumer law. Quick side where I saw the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has basically been gutted this week. But to June's incredibly important points, I mean, as a former state AG at the time, that obviously Pam Bondi was a state AG as well. I'm sure you had plenty of reaction to her firing yesterday.
Well, yeah, it's amazing that Donald Trump has an incredible skill, which is he can make sympathetic figures out of horrible people. And Pam Bondi was one of them. I mean, I feel sorry for somebody who prostrated themselves to be a supplicant to a megalomaniac. And for all the good it did her, she got fired. Now, that said, if anybody knows how to make money in this environment, it's Pam Bondi and her lobbying firm, and so she will have to salve her wounds with millions of dollars in lobbying contracts that she's going to roll through. Which, by the way, is the norm now for former elected attorneys general. Anyway, I love going to the AG's the NAG, National Association of Attorneys General conferences, which I do frequently, because I'm the only one there that's generally not representing a client that has some sort of consumer misbehavior, that they're worried that state AGs are going to investigate or prosecute. The you know and I've actually gotten calls in my office for somebody looking for a referral because they knew that this isn't something that I would engage in, of how to access a pardon in this environment. Well, Pam Bondi can open up Pardons Are Us, and make a wholesale pardons going forward. I mean, those are for sale. There are lawyers that are making a tremendous living who are well connected to Trump, and who are investing in contributing in the ways that Trump and his machine are telling them to do it. So she can. I mean, there's just so many choices that she has here. She can go to lobby for the AI or the crypto industry. She could go lobby for the predictive markets industry. That I mean, who managed to get the Trump administration to sue state regulators who wanted to treat a gambling enterprise like a gambling enterprise in their own states. So while I feel bad for her humiliation, I think there's every indication that she will continue to be well connected enough to these folks, that she can get in on this tremendous corruption gravy train that's coming, or that's proceeding through the federal government. Patrick, you referenced the CFPB, the payday lending industry, the fintech industry, the buy now, pay later industry, the all have lined the pockets of the Trump administration, and as a result, they're getting a direct payoff with the dismantling of the CFPB. That is not a philosophical thing. That is a bought and paid for act of corruption, in closing it down. And they are, you got to admire their persistence. After a judge shut them down, they went back to the same judge and said, "Well, we only want to cut it by this much now, not that much, and we think this is enough to meet the congressionally mandated statutory obligations of the agency." And my expectation is they will continue to go back until the judge will let them decimate it to the maximum possible level. Why? Not because there's a longstanding philosophy that cheating businesses shouldn't be regulated, but because they are the cheating businesses. Certain cheating businesses have made it their business to buy that access in the future. I mean, the deal a couple of weeks ago, putting Claude essentially on the foreign intelligence blacklist, uh, uh, was another example of that. That was not about Claude. It was not about the security risk of their AI system versus OpenAI. It was about the fact that OpenAI has engaged in the open bribery system. I mean, it's a Turkish bazaar of corruption. And again, I remain sad and disturbed for the future of the country, but fascinated by to watch it happen in the daylight. And so she will openly and directly, my prediction is she will openly and directly begin to, sell off access to the Trump administration, and make sure and show her clients how to funnel money and buy crypto and buy stock and invest in the enterprises that are run by Trump's children that will result in positive federal action on their behalf, and within the Justice Department as well. And he'll find a more effective toady to be the United States Attorney General, because she failed in doing a very good job of making Trump's dreams of prosecuting all of his enemies come true. So he's going to go find somebody better at that. Paul, are
Marc,
you volunteering?
yeah, no, no, not for this guy. Can I ask you a question? Speaking about
Yeah,
corruption,
yeah, yeah,
speaking
yeah,
about how difficult these cases are, um,
yeah,
in your state this week, we had
yeah,
a hung jury in a
yeah.
big corruption case, First
Right.
Energy. You any reason that you can see that the jury couldn't figure this out?
Yes, there was a lot and look, again, he's not my political ally, but David
Mhm.
Yost is Ohio's Attorney General, and but for him, these guys would have skated the statute of limitations would have passed, and nobody would have prosecuted them. And there were in Ohio, each county prosecutor has authority, and of course, you have the two United States attorneys that have jurisdiction over these executives. And just to kind of remind you of the story, First
Yep.
Energy conducted the largest corruption enterprise in the history of the state, funneling hundreds of millions of dollars to the Speaker of the House, Larry Householder. Who, along with several of us co-conspirators on the political side, on the lobbying and elected official side, have been convicted and are serving time in federal prison. So the U.S. attorney launched the investigation. What they didn't do and still haven't done is indicted the executives that were doing the bribing. We had one federal judge who was assigned there was a stock fraud case that was brought against First Energy based on the fact that they were, not disclosing that they were engaged in a massive corruption scheme. And the judge there held hearing after hearing, asking the defense lawyers for First Energy who paid the bribes. I want to know who paid those bribes. And until I have the answer to that, I'm not going to approve your class action settlement for shareholders in this case. So there were some, and by the way, a Bush appointed federal judge, not a screaming liberal. So I think a couple of things happened here. One is, believe it or not, the jury was prevented from knowing of the conviction of the public officials who were bribed. Secondly, they were prevented from information by, again, these are all rulings of the judge. Uh, they were prevented from hearing about the transfers of money that took place into certain dark money packs. Those dark money packs then funneled the money to the Speaker of the House. Those financial transactions were directly authorized by the two guys who were accused of the crime, and the jurors have actually freely spoken about the deliberations, and it was there were one or two holdouts on conviction. There was a vast majority of the 12 jurors wanted to see these bad actors go to jail. The other thing, the other quirk of and challenge of, and we've talked about this. This group has talked about this now for probably getting closer to 10 years. But each of those two guys, their criminal defense was paid for by First Energy under their employment contracts. So they had Jones Day and Baker and Hostetler representing two huge firms with former U.S. attorneys representing them and providing their criminal defense. Now, had they been convicted, that First Energy had the right to indemnification from them of those legal fees, which had to be in the tens of millions of dollars, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars. So you have this assistant attorney general, Matt Meyer, and his one guy up against two of the largest law firms in the country on the other side, providing a very very technically capable criminal defense. I mean, Bill, this is probably bringing PTSD back for you from the savings and loan crisis, and Paul, from your prosecution experience, and they did their best, but they lost a lot of evidentiary arguments that they probably should have won, that might potentially be reversible on appeal. So the jury, and even without all that evidence, the jury was 8-2. I'm sorry, 8-2, or 8-4, and or 9-3 in favor of conviction at the end of the trial. So what we've always said is, why don't they bring these cases? Because it's hard, and there's a risk of losing those cases. To the credit of my successor, Dave Yost. He's announced that he wants a new trial, and he's gonna continue the prosecution, and he's going to Now, as I told a client earlier this week, and I was in a car accident myself, and I used myself as an example. Every time you tell the story, it gets harder to be consistent in what happens. And so the challenge of a retrial becomes even much more challenging, because now you've got as cross-examination fodder the transcripts of this entire 6-week trial that are going to be available to whoever's defending the next round of this, and making it that much harder for the prosecution. So they're getting another hand tied behind their back in doing it. But look, I think sincerely, I don't think there's anybody in Ohio that doesn't understand that these guys are guilty of bribing the Speaker of the House. And what he did is he got the state General Assembly to subsidize a nuclear power plant that was losing money in the state, and added hundreds of millions of dollars collectively to the electric bills of the businesses and citizens of the state of Ohio. And by the way, just for good measure, they threw in an Indiana electric power coal power plant that the state was also obligated itself to subsidize, or to allow First Energy to collect money from ratepayers to subsidize by statute. So they went around the Public Utilities Commission. They were also charged with bribing the chair of the Public Utilities Commission, who committed suicide. And I don't believe the jury was ultimately aware of that fact either in the case. It certainly exposed all the things, all the challenges that exist But that doesn't mean you stop trying. And again, to General Yost's credit, go for it. I mean, that they're going to bring the case again, and they're going to give it their best, their absolute best shot. And I think there's no shame in losing when you're trying to do the right thing.
So the Patrick, the takeaway obviously is from what we've been saying for a long time is prosecuting corruption is tough, right? It's really hard, and the more what you need is experienced judges, experienced prosecutors, experienced agents, and as we're talking about the corruption of this administration, I think we can fairly say that this Department of Justice is not going to prosecute it because number one, they've gotten rid of all the talent. But even the last administration, right? June just talked about the report not being public by the judge, the report of the second indictment of Trump down in Florida. Well, the reason why it's not public is because freaking Merrick Garland had the authority to, but didn't release it. He gave it to the judge who he knew was never going to release it. The reason why Trump didn't go to trial is because Merrick Garland sat on his ass for the first 2 years of the administration and didn't do anything. So even when you have people that have all good intentions, unless you have competent people with courage that actually know how to prosecute cases and know how to do it, you still might lose. But that's how you've got to do it. And so we can sit here and talk about corruption all day long, and it is this department's infested with it. But unless and until there's an attorney general and administration that cares about corruption, we learned this week that Trump's been broadcasting, I'm going to go after fraud. I've got the vice president Vance is going to go after fraud, and in blue states, mind you, in blue states, I'm going to go after fraud. It's horse shit. It's not going to happen. They're going to go after and make a big, there's fraud all over the place. You can have an indictment for fraud every day in the blue states if you wanted to and make a big stink about it. But unless and until you have people that are committed and serious with courage about this, it ain't going to happen. So, and we can't wait. We can't depend upon Trump to do that. So I just want to say that we should level our expectations. We should understand that the work that we do now is not to prosecute these cases tomorrow in the next 2 years. It's to set the table and to fill the bag with a plan to get ready for when and if a new administration takes place, if we're going to prosecute them. Of course, the House has a job to do, and I'm sure Bill has a take on all this stuff too, but I just wanted to set the table for that.
Well, I appreciate that, Paul, and I'm going to revert back to you, Bill, in just a moment, but I want to do a quick follow-up here with Paul Peltier, ladies and gentlemen, obviously the veteran of the Department of Justice, nearly 3 decades as a prosecutor, working on some of the largest cases in this country's history, in addition to being, we ferreted out in a previous dialogue, on his team, he had Catherine Rumler, who ended up spinning out of the Obama administration into the general counsel of course, none other than Goldman Sachs, and then, basically seemed like an advisor to all things Epstein in the Epstein files that have come out. But Paul, I want to revert back to you because that dialogue, first of all, the points that June and your colleagues June and Marc made were so incredibly powerful and insightful. But what I found myself really intrigued by, particularly the dialogue between you two, was this intersection between the formidable documentary work of, Academy Award-winning documentarian Alex Gibney on HBO, who provided work that you both were in the middle of there in the conversation. The first being the Dark Money Game, which was one of the episodes was specific to First Energy and all things what was happening in Ohio, particularly in the dark money situation. And then ultimately, the other side of that, as I recall, was the crime of the century that you were interviewed for, Paul, by way of Purdue Pharma. And I know that, by the way, Marc, Dan, you were involved with Purdue Pharma as well. But I want to revert back to this kind of central question you mentioned last week, right? You said, as far as the electorate's concerned, they're not going to really respond until the pocketbook issues of affordability crisis and all of those things really take shape in their life, which we're seeing explode because of the war in Iran and other things that have already been in play, right? But at the
Mhm.
same time, you have this intersection, look, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse has been all over the stump, with this new sort of revelation of who knew what, when, and how regarding potentially Russian involvement with all things Epstein. And I bring it up sometimes here and there, the suspicious activity reports and everything else. But you add on that Pam Bondi. And so we've got everything you've been in the midst of for literally decades, Paul. And you just said until we have a competent or an administration that literally what makes corruption the centerpiece of a campaign, and like June said earlier, a truth and reconciliation campaign. Could you explore that a little bit further from your perspective, given all of the
Yeah.
stuff that we're in the midst of?
Well, yeah. I mean, again, I still believe that economics and kitchen table issues move electorates, right? But at this we have a level of corruption here that this country's never seen, right? On every level, we have, and I disagree a little bit with June. I think this guy, Trump, this is the Trump I've seen for the last 15 years. He's getting older. He's getting older. He mispronounces words, but if you watch him, he's the same. He's exactly the same. It is transactional. He moves from topic to topic, which people that have lost their mind can't do in a way.
No, 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 no. No, I'm saying something else. I mean,
Okay.
first of all, I think you're right. The difference between Trump as he always was and Trump getting older. But even if he's suffering from dementia, now, an extreme diagnosis,
Yeah.
still you have good days. You have people who are their normal selves. And then there are things that are off. The single biggest thing in that speech is lack of energy and difficulty staying on task. My brother, the psychologist, says he's ADHD to the hilt. And those things will get older both with age and with any underlying condition. So I'm not diagnosing him. I leave that to others.
Yeah, and I don't disagree. I think, look, at the end of the day, though, that's not going to. I don't think that's going to push people. I think it's going to be what he's doing to the economy. And I do think corruption does have an impact, and it has an impact in this way. People see that the very rich are doing well off, and everybody else isn't. And I think I think most Americans see that today, and I think that's the winner as it relates to independent voters. I think that's going to drive independent voters to the Democrats, regardless of the Democrats have an answer to affordability, which of course the answer to affordability is a million things, right? So and they're not going to have the key to that. But Trump is a malignant narcissist and a sociopath, and he is still a malignant narcissist and
Yes.
a sociopath. And it's what's going to it could put us in World War III territory, and that's what scares me every single day, because he's not driven by what you and I and other people are driven by. He's driven by himself. And to show he's not totally crazy, he can focus on things. When they're asking about the war on Air Force One, he brings out 12 freaking pictures of the new ballroom, and he explains in minute detail how the new ballroom is going to be a wonderful thing. Now, most Americans look at that and say, I don't care whether he's crazy or not. He's spending all my money on this goddamn ballroom, right? So
Yes.
anyway, so I don't know that answers your question, Patrick, but I think at the end of the day, that for the next 2 years, to the extent there's corruption, it's going to have to be tackled by Congress, not by the Department of Justice. That's a waste of time. But the Democrats better be laying a foundation for this Truth and Reconciliation Commission that has to be put in place. God forbid that they don't take hold of the Senate and the House. But if they do, that I think that there's a chance for that to begin eliminating this two-tier system of justice that we've had in America for a long time. Anyway, I'm sorry it took so long.
No. Thank you for identifying, because I think that's the prescient point that everybody's responding to, of course, because of especially Epstein, right? And Trump, the more you look at it. But William K. Black, of course, the professor of criminology at the University of Minnesota. Incredible experience and career as a regulator in fighting corruption, most known for obviously the savings and loan crisis, but he's also an expert in the economy as well as all things legal issues. But Bill, I think all of this conversation that preceded this is the perfect opportunity for you to potentially, I don't know, the question that keeps ruminating in my mind is that I see all the time, Bill, that people in mainstream media, whether they're influencers, in independent media, I should say, and then mainstream and everything else, they continue to characterize the Epstein debacle, disaster, all of those other elements that it may be, as the world's largest cover-up, right? Or the largest cover-up in history. Meanwhile, I know what you've been in the midst of for a very long time, not to mention what we saw in the 2008 great financial crisis. I wonder if you can kind of put that into perspective.
Sure. So here are three big takeaways. One, elite corruption and crime are massively more destructive than all the other forms of crime. They cause catastrophically more damage, measured in literally many tens of trillions of dollars, but they also maim and kill people, right? And why is that true? Well, Bastiat, an obscure French proto-economist, explained this centuries ago. I'll paraphrase it. When plunder becomes a way of life for men in society, he means the ruling men in society, they create a legal system that authorizes it and a moral code that glorifies it. All right? They don't just say, oh, it's okay. They valorize it. Anybody that's watched all the Manosphere stuff and the Joe Rogan stuff and such has seen this in the modern incarnation, right? That it's cool to be basically a predator. And to be able to predate with impunity. Now, what does this mean? It means you act strategically. You don't just accept the law as given. You don't accept the facts as given. You don't accept the fact that you're a moron as given. You cheat, but you cheat in a way that rigs the system. And part of that rigging of the system is to maximize your take. Part of it is to hire all the PR stuff, actually have your corporation hire and bear the costs and turn you into an icon, and then you do it in a way that you could do this with impunity, where you can literally change the law, change the courts, change the prosecutors, and such. This is why Trump minions are in Hungary, trying to help their role model, Orban, maintain his corrupt rule in Hungary at this time. These are why these folks are natural allies. This is why they're natural allies of Putin. Because Putin, Orban, these are the role models of Donald Trump, right? The third thing is, we can succeed against these folks, but it is, as I would ultra emphasize what Paul has been saying, and Marc gave examples of, it's extraordinarily difficult. And it's not good enough to succeed in a single case. And this is Marc's point, absolutely dead on. A state, a whole frigging state, a large state, right? Ohio can barely bring one case. And it's a thing of joy and deserving of praise that they simply bring this action competently. Well, but there are 1,000 robber barons doing this in the United States. I mean, there are tens of thousands of robber barons in the U.S. doing this at any given time. And when the president of the United States, when you marry the corruption of the public sector with the corruption of the private sector, you get this ultra bastiat impunity to do these things. But that's also the message of hope that we bring you. You think it's hard now? Think back in the Ronald Reagan days, right? The president of the United States was seeking to give the regulatory agency in charge of savings and loans control of it to the worst looter in America, Charles Keating. Tried to give him majority control. There was no criminal referral system at all at that time at any of the banking regulatory agencies. That had to be created. Once we created it and made tens of thousands, we ultimately made, just in the savings and loan industry, 30,000 criminal referrals in major cases. The Justice Department refused to prosecute. Or indeed, it refused to even investigate. We had to embarrass the Attorney General of the United States into prosecuting by posting every month how many criminal referrals we'd made and noting that there were no even investigations. Now, thereafter, a new Attorney General came in under Ronald Reagan and under Bush and transformed and made it a high priority. And you got over 2,000 successful prosecutions, convictions in the most elite cases, in which we sent hundreds of CEOs to prison and embarrassed the hell out of the sitting administration. But strategy is never static. People learn from our success, the bad guys, right? And there were intervening things like the 9/11 attacks, where they gutted the Justice Department, the administration, not because it was evil, because it was responding to that terror attacks, and said, who can we transfer in the FBI to be able to deal with terror? I know, the white collar specialists that follow the money, because we'll follow the terrorist funding. Perfectly reasonable thing. And they gutted the whole ability to deal with elite white collar crime. Now, that was not essential. They could have hired additional people, just like Paul has just emphasized. The guys in, the Attorney General in charge of prosecuting could actually prosecute and not wait years to appoint a special prosecutor. And you could say, this is a priority in terms of timing. It's got to get done. All of that is appropriate. So those things are always going to be contingent. They're always going to be fought. It's always going to be incredible power on the other side. And they're going to try to fix the system. Let me leave you with just one example that became public, I think yesterday. Department of Justice took the position formally that the Presidential Record Act is unconstitutional. Why did it do that? Because that act requires you, as an administration, to preserve the records of the administration. And that's how we make cases. We look at those records. So they're going to have, and they're open about this, they intend to destroy not thousands of documents, but literally probably numbers in the millions of documents, so they can get away with their crimes with impunity. This is what happens when the CEO, the president, whatever, the head of state, whatever is called, work together in these corrupt networks. And again, I'll just leave you. Yes, this causes staggering economic losses, but it also kills democracies. And it kills people. Many people will die as a result of all of this. And you can see with the new budget, and you can see with the very first acts when they came in and said, you know, that aid that's keeping millions of people alive internationally, gone. Let them die. And they're not just people, they tended to be infants in particular.
June, to close this out, a couple of things. I mean, I didn't introduce this at the beginning, but Bill just triggered my memory, considering that the administration is now asking for a $1.5 trillion military budget, and then gutting, all social safety nets and Medicare and all of the other things in context of what he said. But from the very beginning, you and your colleagues have been transparent about the consequences that at times have dropped my jaw to the floor. When Paul laid out what was going to happen as a result of gutting U.S. aid, I literally had to, stop and think about. He must have made a mistake. He didn't mean to say those extraordinary numbers. I believe at the time were in the hundreds of thousands of deaths, which we've now realized and we've seen, and that was like however many stories ago because of Flood the Zone. But this week to kind of throw this in there as well is especially the accountability that you talked about in the information. You see all over social media, people say, release the Epstein files over and over and over. And I think to myself, my God, we've seen so much from what has already been released that a competent Department of Justice and FBI would have enough to run investigations through the roof on this thing. Not to mention that we know about the 302s and what the FBI had and sat on with this extraordinary story. In addition, last point, Bank of America settled for $70 million this week, 2026. This on top of, I think, $500 million or roughly $470 million in some kind of settlement that went, we don't know what the forensics are, who the attorneys, St. Thomas, blah, blah, blah. That's hundreds of millions of dollars in settlements for people to not know anything, right? And it's boggling my mind that all of this stuff is transparent, but yet what we can't, because of what happens with when people say non-disclosures, I guess, to take, I mean, it's a real mess, right? How do you get inside of this stuff when you have a competent administration, given all the decisions that have been made now?
Well, I want to end by saying everything the five of us have described in this podcast is worse. So Paul and Marc were describing how much it takes to bring one case. One case against somebody with the resources of a major corporation. The story that hasn't fully been told is what happened to Joe Biden. So Joe Biden came in. Joe Biden appointed much more aggressive people at the SEC, at the FTC. And they brought cases. They brought antitrust cases against Meta. Okay. They cracked down on crypto. We've described various times. Crypto is basically a Ponzi scheme, and the potential to rip off lots of people is there. The Biden administration tried to make us safe. What was the response? Sherrod Brown in Ohio and John Tester in Montana, two Democrats in red states, were defeated in large part because the crypto boys flooded the states with money to defeat people who had stood up against them. Now, they didn't say crypto is wonderful. Vote for our guy because he will protect crypto. They said, do you know what these people are doing? They're supporting trans rights. That's what they did. And they funded campaigns that were very effective. The business community is not standing up to Donald Trump, not just because he picks them off one at a time, like the law firms, but because he's making them rich. So let's just take Jeff Bezos. Bezos's net worth is now, according to Wikipedia, somewhere between 233 billion and 249 billion. That's increased by roughly 50 billion since Donald Trump became president. These folks are bought off. The Supreme Court is bought off, not in a direct quid pro quo kind of way, but the The Chamber of Commerce, starting in the 70s, followed by the extremely well-funded Federalist Society, has been moving to stack the court with pro-business folks at least since the administration of Ronald Reagan. You look at somebody like Justice Kennedy, who many of us admired because he wrote the deciding opinion in Obergefell. And most people think of Justice Kennedy as a sensible, responsible, moderate Republican. But he was one of the most pro-business people in the court. And what the court has done, the Roberts Court has done, but the court, the Rehnquist Court before Roberts, is to make it dramatically harder to get securities convictions. They overturned the conviction of Jeff Skilling, the Enron guy, who everybody has vilified as a total fraud. Now, lower courts reinstated on other grounds, so he still went to jail. But the Supreme Court made it harder to bring all of these cases. To go in and clean house, Bill is absolutely right. You've got to look at the way corporate America has rigged the system. I'm not talking about Trump. I'm not talking, what Pam Bondi is doing is small bore. It's egregious because it's about Epstein. It's about victims who we can see and feel their pain, and she is indifferent. It is egregious because she's lying and almost certainly deleted documents or covered up documents that implicated Trump. But it's still small bore in dollar amounts to the massive corruption going on in corporate America. Let me simply note a couple of figures. If you go back to the 50s and 60s, the average CEO made 20 times what the average worker made. Today, the average CEO at its height, took off in the 90s. In its height, the average CEO was making 399 times what the average worker makes, maybe down now to only 250 times. But when you ask the question how these people get extraordinarily rich, when you gut enforcement, what you've got is the ability to rip off the little guy. Now, the little guys often their employees. Let's gut unions. The Supreme Court, especially Samuel Alito, has said, how can we help? And when you get rid of unions, you don't just get rid of countervailing power within a given corporation. You get rid of the groups that would rally behind a Sherrod Brown or a John Tester, Sherrod Brown in particular, who has stood up the little guy very consistently. But that infrastructure has been systematically and intentionally dismantled. In the meantime, who are the shock troops of the Republican Party? BuzzFeed had this little, this little kind of fun kind of piece where they interview people who moved from red states to blue states and blue states to red states. And, some people really like the moves in both directions and some people hate them in both directions. But the persistent thing was about red states is how the churches dominate. And the story of the churches is not really anything negative necessarily about churches, but it's two things that has been very deliberate. The destruction of other institutions in rural areas. The single biggest source of job growth in recent decades in rural areas was Obamacare and keeping rural hospitals open. And Trump has worked overtime to destroy that and has done so particularly in this administration, the second Trump. And so what's left are the churches, and more radically conservative churches have grown at a faster rate than more liberal churches. So when you go to an area where institutions are being systematically destroyed, where the school board started being taken over by the Tea Party because the Koch brothers funded them, and where people who don't agree with these moves leave, and where public education is under assault, especially in rural areas where there are very few alternatives, is you have the making and you have the Grand Coalition. So the Grand Coalition is deregulation at the top, allowing predatory practices that disempower individual students, citizens, and At the same time, the destruction of the institutions that could serve as countervailing powers. So what you're left with is people who are true believers, the mega base, in declining economies where everything else has been systematically undermined. And then the oligarchs who are empowered to rip people off with impunity. Taking on that system isn't about selective prosecution, so that's not a bad start. It's about power. It's about recognizing that since Reagan, the GOP has stood for one thing and one thing only, accumulating power that enriches those who are the beneficiaries of the new system. And so, unless the Democratic Party starts thinking about power, how do we create new organizations systematically throughout the country? How do we create a new message? How do we talk about climate change as something that is entirely, that denialism is about oil companies buying Donald Trump, they own him lock, stock, and barrel, and saying, oh, you could have an electric car and oil price rises might not matter, but you've been sold a bill of goods by somebody who works overtime at the behest of powerful entities determined to keep you on the hook for us. So you pay more at the pump and it goes directly into our pockets, and nobody is talking about an excess profit tax, the typical thing to do in wartime. So we need to link accountability and a Truth and Reconciliation Commission with attention to power, to discrediting the ruling elites. Hey, we, the Academy, have been discredited by the right for years, but we have so little real power. The puppet masters behind the scenes need to be made visible and discredited. And then it becomes possible, not just to have prosecutions, but to imagine systematic regulation that disempowers them.
Wow. Well, I was reminded of two songs as you were concluding there from my youth. War, what is it good for? Obviously, the oil and gas companies and their corporate, underlings were undergirded by their law firms and so forth, and the revolving door accountants. And then, of course, the Beastie Boys, listen all y'all, it's a sabotage. Well, that hour went so fast that we didn't have a chance to even discuss birthright citizenship and all the things that happened earlier this week in the Supreme Court. But boy, was that a powerful consensus in, to remind the viewers out there. I mean, I watch a lot of podcasts. I watch a lot of legal experts. You're not getting the inside details of A, problem, and B, potential roadmap to solutions by way of the greatest minds in corruption, I think, in the American history.
You might want to rephrase that, but
well, I didn't say that I said in knowing how to
not in committing corruption,
knowing
and
how to
exposing
thwart
corruption.
corruption.
Yeah.
And you guys have done it for years and decades, and that's why, of course,
because by far that award goes to the Trump administration. The greatest minds in corruption are now serving in the highest government offices in this country.
Actually, they're not. It's still a bunch of incompetence. If you want to see much more skilled, corrupt people, I can point you to a number of countries where they're really good at it.
Okay.
Oh, and all of Wall Street that's doing it legally.
Well, that's true. There's that. So,
well, that again is Bastiat's point. Your ultimate success is getting your fraud and corruption legalized and valorized.
Right.
Well, and again, like every Dem that I've seen so far, it's all about we're not Trump, right? I don't see a plan to cut the cord to the oligarchs. I don't see a massive plan to requisite corruption. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, well, I say this all the time, but it's really, really, really true. It's audacity, not genius. Trump's secret power is not genius. It's audacity, that he has no restraints.
And Bill, just real quick, last week we had really pretty much the central player in the entire No Kings rally was Minneapolis, and we saw Bruce Springsteen perform, and he's all in. Do you have any parting comments about really that sort of level of at least trying his best from his perspective to bring more attention to some of these issues?
Nobody in the entertainment space has been better. God bless him. And on behalf of fellow Minnesotans, I cannot tell you how positive we are. And as ACLU supporters, how proud we are that he assisted with the challenge on birthright citizenship with his wonderful song, Born in the USA.
Outstanding. And Bruce, if you're watching, the new untouchables are folks that maybe we ought to take next level. On behalf of the new untouchables, my name is Patrick Lovell, William K. Black, June Carbone, Paul Peltier, and of course Marc Dan. And I also want to say that Lewis Clark couldn't join us today. He had to attend a family function, and he notified us at the last minute. But to remind everybody, the Government Accountability Project has had some tremendous success recently, particularly as it relates to all things what we've talked about with whistleblowers and the importance of what Bill Black's taught us the entire time that conveyed to everybody else's work here. And so on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for tuning in. Please check out thenewuntouchables.com. Please check out thecleannewdeal.org. And until next time, all the best. We'll see you again. Take care.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks.
East.
And